Welcome, everybody. Today I have a very special guest, my friend Hamid Aziz. He is a broker with Aziz Realty. Hamid, how's it going?
Good, good. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity. Hopefully, I could add some value to your listeners, and if they ever have any questions, they could reach out to you or myself. So,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Hamid and I actually connected about a year or so ago through social media, and he's been a great resource and he's very knowledgeable when it comes to buying and selling here in the Sacramento market. So he's a very valuable resource here. Hamid, let's share a little some information on how you can help buyers who are interested in purchasing and looking for either their first home or upgrading or anything like that.
so, a little bit about me. I've done over about 50 transactions in the last 3 years, mainly helping the buyers and the sellers. My always goal is whenever I get a referral or a call from somebody there saying they want to buy, right? My goal is I usually like to meet with them in person, face to face. One, if I don't know them already, it helps just to put the face with the number so I know who they are and get to know them a little bit more on personal level and to get to meet them and learn more about their personality types, right? I think having that initial conversation with anybody that you meet, doesn't matter, it's a buyer, seller, or other agents in the networking or the business, I think is a really good. So I usually meet them. And at the meeting, they always ask, "Oh, what are we meeting for?" I was like, "Hey, just so you and I will meet in person, talk about a strategy, see what you're looking for. Sure, you're looking for a house, but I'm talking about specifics like, okay, what area, how many bedrooms, how many square footage, how old the house, right? What price range? And even if they have pre-approval for, let's say they could be 500,000 or 600,000, but that doesn't mean they're going to go up that range, right? So I talk about that. And also as a real estate agent, we have access to this thing from California Association of Realtors. They have this buyer's responsibility checklist and seller's responsibility checklist. I might be not having the right name, but I have the PDF document from them, which outlines what the contractual deadlines are for the buyer. Okay. Since we're talking about that, for example, just to quickly run through, it tells them that, okay, hey, as a buyer, you have, let's say, certain number of days for contingencies. You have certain number of days for the deposit that you need to put in. And what are the inspections that you could do? What is appraisal? All the gist of the timeline. Because I think my always approach has been for the last couple of years is I tell them, I was like, sure, I love to earn your business. My thing is, hey, I want to make you an educated buyer because the last thing I want to do is we get in a transaction and you don't know what you're talking about, or I don't know what I'm talking about. And we're like, okay, where does this come from? So I
Yeah.
think having that discussion with the buyer about contractual deadlines or the timeline is really crucial, especially for a first time buyer because they never owned a house or haven't owned a house in 3 years. That's according to the Fannie Mae Freddie Mac is what they say. If you haven't owned a house in the past 3 years, that means you're considered a first time home buyer. So I think having that refresher is really key so that way they know what they're expected of them during the contract. I recently closed a transaction. He was a new buyer from overseas, never bought a house in America. And same thing I'm describing here. We met, we talked about it. He was actually a doctor, so he was a very educated guy. And we discussed and we talked about all the contractual deadline. And then question came up about inspection. He's like, okay, so we do inspection. What's the purpose? I was like, hey, you just trying to get to know the house before you buy in. I mean, I was like, yeah, the inspector's job is to tell you anything and everything that's wrong with the house, but that doesn't mean the house is technically a bad house. So you're just getting to know all the faults, and then you go back to the seller to see if they're willing to either correct some of the major issues or if they're willing to give you credit. So you kind of keep the deal afloat. I think that is a crucial part, like touching on all the aspects of the timeline and the contract, as this is I tell people it's a legal binding agreement because you can't just back up for any reason, right? There has to be some kind of event that happened. For example, if you do inspection and you don't like it, let's say it needs a new roof, you didn't know that beforehand, and now you're like, hey, that's extra $10,000 out of my pocket that I don't have the budget for, so I'm gonna back up. Well, that's fine. That's a valid exception, unless the seller says, hey, okay, what if you increase the price to 10,000? If the appraisal will support that, then I'll pay for the roof. I mean, there are ways to work that out, but I think having the basic understanding of their contractual timeline is really crucial, and then that helps to have a smooth transaction.
Wow, a lot of knowledge bombs that you just dropped there. I think one quick thing that I found very
Sure.
interesting, and I think a lot of buyers might not know or current homeowners know, is that you could still be considered a first time home buyer if you haven't bought a house in how many years? Is it 2 or 3?
3 years,
3 years.
in
Okay,
Canada.
that's a really good point because you could own a house right now that you purchased
Yes.
3 4 years ago, and then you could go out and decide on buying another one and still qualify for that first time home buyer program and stuff.
Yes, yeah, I think this was true even now and even back in the days when people lost houses, so they had to wait 3 years. So that's where that rule came about, which is valid, right? Hey, if you haven't owned the house for 3 years, and pretty much what a lot of people don't understand is all it is it makes you eligible for a FHA buying program, which is a 3.5% down payment. I mean, if you have the money and the capital to buy a house every month, every 2 months, you will need to do conventional. I mean, yeah, you could do that. I mean, there's no stopping point. The only thing is, if you're trying to get the FHA 3.5% minimum down to live in as a primary residence, is what you would need to wait at least 3 years. So,
Yeah, good points. Well, all good points. Very a lot of information. That's awesome that you have so much experience and you've helped, first time home buyers, with that home process. How can you help on the flip side? How can you help sellers, people who own a house and they want to sell?
so good question. On the sellers, same thing. I usually tell them, talk to them about the listing agreement so that way they know what they're signing. Because again, it's a binding agreement. You want to make sure what terms you're signing for, what percentage. Usually, the number one issue that arise in my experience with the seller and the agent is how much commission are you charging, right? So, I mean,
Hmm.
that could be the breaking point because everybody always has a number that they have to meet in order for them to sell the house, right? I mean, hey, at the end of the day, they're trying to make money, we're trying to make money. So you want to make sure everything is spelled out legally, and that way there are no issues. Having the timeline of how much time they're giving to you to sell the house, what percentage, and if you're trying to do a double end the transaction or double and means like you as a listing agent will be representing the buyer as well, like what the percentage will be. Having all that spelled out clear cut way, I think is really crucial. And that's just one of it. On the other side, as to prepare for the house, I tell the usually I do the same thing with the pre-inspection, or some people call it pre-listing inspection. I'll go walk the house with them. I recently went to one in Pittsburgh area. The guy, he wants to sell a house, but he needs either he could sell it as is because it needs new paint inside the house, and it doesn't have granite countertop. And I was upfront. I was like, "Hey, look, no disrespect about your property, but if you're trying to get an X amount of money and trying to sell it for the top dollars, you need to do these things." So I'm just being 100% honest because otherwise they're gonna expect me to sell it for, let's say, 650, while the house is only worth for like 550.
Yeah.
And what could be the difference for the 100,000 is, look, I mean, Siberia, for example, just to continue using that example, their house needs good 20 to 30,000 dollar work, right? It needs a full interior paint. It needs the kitchen needs new granite countertop cabinets,
Mhm.
and the backyard needs fencing and stuff like that. So I was like, any potential buyer that comes in, they're gonna deduct all of these. You could list it at X amount. They're gonna be like, "Hey, that's not realistic." So I think on that, as far as how the house, how much the house is ready to sell, is also a really crucial part. I think having, it doesn't matter here or the area, having, let's say, pest report completed, a homeless inspection completed, and a termite inspection completed beforehand or before you list it. Maybe the seller will do some of those repairs, and then you could inspect it to get a better or cleaner report. I think that would definitely add value to any potential buyer, and then you could upload them, of course, to MLS to let them know, hey, we did this inspection, that was initial, this is what the current is, and we did these X amount of things. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and a lot more helpful information, helpful tips that you provide to buyers. I think the last question that I want to bring up is what was one of the toughest, I guess, deals or situations that you've gone into buyer or seller side, and how did you overcome the problem or issue?
So we had one, see, real estate is always changing, right?
Mm.
We had one transaction earlier in the year, which we closed, where the buyer's agent was out of LA area. I'm local, the buyer was local, and they wrote offer where they were going to cover appraisal gap, right? And that was the sticking point about 6 months ago. Now it's different. People are more cognizant of how much offer they're trying to write, how much gap they're willing to cover, right? Which
Yeah.
is key. And that issue was we were in contract at 550, appraisal came in at 517. So there was a $33,000 difference. So now the seller is like, hey, I'm entitled to 550 because that's what they wrote the contract for. And the buyer's like, hey, look, we're not paying that. We, even though the buyer signed a statement saying that they will cover the appraisal gap. Well, the thing was, buyer's house, to purchase this house, they lost out about $30,000 on their sale of the house because of the similar issue, because of the appraisal came in lower, so they had to reduce the price. So it was a ripple effect. Well, we didn't know that, and then seller was so upset that, hey, I'm gonna take them to court, and I'm gonna try to get the promised money that it was. And ultimately, what we did, I was like, sure, sir, you could take them to court. I mean, yeah, they signed a legal binding agreement, but unfortunately, uh, your house will be tied up. So you're gonna have legal costs. You're gonna have cloud on your title. You're not gonna be able to sell for another who knows until the case is resolved in the
Yeah.
court, right? So it could drag out for, I don't know. I mean, I've never been in that situation, but it could drag out to like a few months to a year. Who knows, right? And then finally, we made the counter offer to the buyer, like, okay, hey, you agreed to 550, appraisal came in at 517. Why don't we meet somewhere in the middle? So they were like, hey, we could come up to 535. And seller was like, no. But then we finally said, hey, 537, take it or leave it. So another couple thousand. So that was the key. And then it took us about a week where the transaction was stalled. So we finally met where, hey, at 537, and we closed the deal. But it was really tough because I understand from seller's point, you get the offer and you vet the buyer, but at the end, it's hard to know what's going to happen. I mean, I
Sure.
recently had a deal canceled just 5 days before close of escrow because
Yeah.
it's just the buyer could not perform. I think having realistic expectation and doing your due diligence, just like they say, when you're filing your taxes, make sure all your income is reported. Same thing, I think, in real estate, especially from seller side, our buyer side. Make sure you have all your paperwork, document everything, and then real expectation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean that's awesome, and I think you brought up a lot of good points, and your experience and you being a broker, has really helped you, get out of those jams, which
Yes, it did. One thing I'll also say is like real estate is a emotional game. People are attached. Just like I have my own house, I don't want to sell it, for example, right? So it's a more of an emotional attachment. So I, as a real estate agent or broker, and I tell any other person that, hey, you have to be able to use some kind of psychology. I'm not trying to say it's like black magic or anything like that. It's just being more of a people's person and trying to figure out, really listen to what it is that they want. And I'm sure if you go back and forth enough, and it will make it work because there's a keys to everybody's thing, right? We all have that one thing that we want. And once you get that, we should be fine.
yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, well, so much information that you've shared. I know listeners will get a lot of gold nuggets out of this, both from buyer, seller, and your experience as a broker. As we close out here, what is the best way for people to get in contact with you?
I do have a website, azizgrouprealty.com. That's one way, or my Zillow profile, which has all of my recent sales. And I'm also a Redfin partner, so I'm pretty readily available. If you just Google search Hamid Aziz, I usually pop up also on LinkedIn. So I'm on all social medias. I try to help anybody and anybody that I can in any way, shape, or form. So appreciate the opportunity of you having me on your podcast.
Awesome. Yes. And I'll include your links in the show notes. And yeah, definitely appreciate you being on. I know I learned some stuff, and I know that listeners will learn a few gold nuggets as well.
Hey, thank you so much, Martin. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Have a good day. See you, man.
You too. Thank you.